Welcome back to episode 318 of the Tall Boy Radio podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, beer is heading towards the United States once more as we're joined by another member of the police community. But as always, there's more to the story than just that. And talking of stories, he's written one or two himself. We'll find out a little bit about that before we say hello to the man on the left.
How are we? Evening all, evening the world. Yeah, looking forward to this. Another new guest, and again, a topic that we've been sort of delving into a little bit. So I'd be absolutely fascinated just to see our guests' take on it and to talk to him a little bit about sort of life after the police and what he's done subsequently. So yeah, can't wait for this.
Indeed. And he's done a fair bit. You won't be too surprised to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Andrew, did you want to say hello and tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, hello, and thanks to you for having me on. My name is Andrew Nelson, and like you said, I was a member of the NYPD for 20 years, and after that, I became a writer, and to date, I've published 16 books, 13 of which are fiction, mystery, so.
Indeed, one of which I have in my hand here, which is this the first one you wrote?
That's the first one, yes.
So it seemed like a good place to start.
Absolutely. I did a little bit of sort of reading as such, and you mentioned that each of your books, although they can be sort of standalone, there's a couple of sort of subplots that sort of run through some of them. Is that something that you were always keen to do, just to sort of weave the stories in and out, or was it, very much, they are sort of standalone stories?
I started off as a reader, and so I like getting immersed into worlds that go on. And when you read Tom Clancy or Frank Herbert, you've got these voluminous books, and so as I'm writing it, I always had an idea of where the story ends up, and it's just a progression on it. You go from one event, which is like a standalone aspect of the book, but there's always been like this underlying current that carries over from book to book as the story progresses.
Yeah.
And just out of interest then, how much did you draw from your career when you started writing these books?
You do. A lot of the backstory, a lot of the little incidents that go on, some of the conversation that takes place. Obviously, the characters in the book are a composite of a bunch of different people. So yeah, you draw on a lot of it. Even for like the smaller things that don't necessarily get noticed, they're more like the background in the book, but those are all real. The conversations, the banter, things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, sort of, from somebody reading your books or some of your ex-colleagues, would they be able to say, oh, that was me, or oh no, we did that? Were there some bits that you absolutely did draw upon that potentially sort of colleagues will go, hey Andrew, a minute, hold on a minute, I remember that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. If you were intimately involved in it, you would remember it. Yeah.
Right. Brilliant. And again, I'm fascinated by sort of how you become an author, I suppose. I've said on many sort of podcasts, and particularly on ours over a number of years, I would love to write a book. I think I have the start and I have the story, and it's just all of the backfill, it's the backstories, it's the fill bits. So I'm fascinated to know how you went from having a concept to having an idea from a fiction point of view to then filling in all blanks to make it a working novel.
Well, I was telling Beans earlier, this all started off on a dare. I was still back in New York at the time. My wife and I were both voracious readers, and we were having a conversation one day about books, and she had said that she thought it would be hard to write a book. And me, in my stupidity, said, no, I think it'd be, kind of easy. I've been reading for, 40 years.
Yeah.
And I've been writing reports. How hard could it be? That's not what you want to tell your wife. So she dared me. I started writing a couple of chapters in it. I gave it to her. She thought it was really good. I thought she was lying. Then 9/11 happened, and so everything kind of went on the back burner. I retired, kind of got bored, and said, I need something to do. And she said, well, why don't you finish that book?
Right.
I was like, I don't even remember it. She goes, I do. Yeah, she, gave me all the information that she had, and I sat down and I started to write it. And as it went along and went, beyond what I had done previously, I realized I actually enjoyed it. It was fun to sit there and actually create, a world in my mind.
Yeah.
And so it took me about a year to write the first book. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but it was very cathartic for me sitting down there and putting all these ideas that I had in my head and kind of crafting this. And in the end, seeing the book come out and realize that I had done something, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah. No, yeah, impressive. Yeah.
Like you said, we were talking at the start, and same as Gaz, I've had this idea about writing a book, and I've started a couple of times and just gone back and read it and thought, this is terrible. I don't even want to read it back. It's that bad. You know what I mean? So I've taken my hat off to anybody who can not just write one, but write as many books that you've had. Before we get onto your authoring career and your writing career, though, let's find out a little bit about the man, in the uniform, where this inspiration came from. Can you tell us what got you interested in joining the NYPD in the first place?
People have asked me that before, and I can honestly say from like the age of 5, I knew that I wanted to be a New York City cop. That's all I ever wanted. So there was no other alternative. There was no plan. Well, I shouldn't say that. There was a plan B. There was a very brief period of time where I wanted to be an oceanographer. And that ended when I saw Jaws. I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm done with that. So it was a very brief window of one summer. But I'd always wanted to be a cop. My grandfather's friends were all cops. So I later on, I came to find out that I actually did have a cousin way back in the 19th century that was a New York City cop. But up until that point, I hadn't known of anybody in my family, so this was like a unique path for me. But growing up and being around them and seeing them, I mean, those were my heroes. So there was really no, other career that I wanted to pursue other than being a cop. So I started back in the 1980s, which was a very interesting time. That was during the height of the, crack epidemic and everything.
Yeah.
And, having grown up in the 70s, when, as a teenager and seeing, how bad the city was, it was a rough time. So I came into the NYPD at the height of all of that. And so it was an eye opener as a young kid becoming a cop. And so I was on patrol for 5 years. Then I went into investigations, did that for a while, earned my detective shield from that. Then went into the intelligence division, doing dignitary protection and foreign investigations. We would handle, like, if Interpol contacted the NYPD and needed something done, that would get filtered down to me. But it was the protection that kind of was like, if anybody pointed to a moment in my career that was the most amazing, it would have been doing dignitary protection, because you see the world completely different when you say it's like being inside the fish bubble and being around presidents and the Pope and royalty. Gives you a whole different perspective on it.
Yeah, I've got a list of some of the names here that you was it the Elite Protection Unit is what I asked you about.
It was the Intelligence Division.
The Intelligence Division,
yeah.
Cool. So Pope John Paul II,
mm-hmm.
Bill Clinton,
yep,
Yasser Arafat,
mm-hmm.
and Benjamin Netanyahu, to name but a few. There's some
some of them don't get much bigger than that, really, when you think about it.
I actually had Clinton, Netanyahu, and Arafat at the same time.
Wow.
Back in 1998. So that was quite interesting. Having the top three political figures in the world at that time doing the advance work on it. I don't think I slept or took a breath for the whole week.
Oh, I imagine. How close did you get to those people? Did you get to have conversations with them? Did you find out anything about them on a personal level?
You rarely do, because you're there to provide protection. So and to that point, they're so used to being protected that you just become part of the background scenery.
Yeah.
But you're present for a lot of things that the average person will never, will never be able to comprehend. It's like being a witness, a silent, witness to history.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting time for me. It plays out in some aspects of the book. When they're talking about it, because my protagonist, James McGuire, was a member of the intelligence division. So that plays out a little bit inside there. Some of the characters that are mentioned were drawn from people that I worked with. So it was a very interesting time seeing things that you would normally never see.
Yeah. And were you, during that time in your career, were you part of the almost the intelligence in terms of setting up the protection? Because I'm assuming that you would then direct, this is going to sound really disrespectful and I don't mean it to be, others who would just be the heavies and the bodyguards as such. Were you part of that, actually the intelligence that would formulate whether it's routes to and from buildings, in and out of buildings and all of that? Were you quite central to that?
Yes. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I did all the planning for when Pope John Paul II was coming into New York City. His first visit was going to be to Shea Stadium, which is a baseball stadium in Queens. Yeah. And so I did the advance work for all of that. That got canceled. And then he came out the following year and went to Aqueduct Racetrack, and I was responsible for that. And that planning on something like that takes months to go through, because you only get one shot at it, and no pun intended. You're responsible for keeping this person safe, and so you're going through everything, from the top of the facility all the way down. You have to learn it inside and out, where the egresses are, if God forbid there's an emergency. So yeah, there's a lot of planning that goes into it.
I mean, you obviously read, some accounts of people, and they talk about lines of sight, and they talk about clearing buildings adjacent to where the person is, because potentially there's a shooter up there or a shooter up there, or and I can't fathom actually I suppose the level of detail and therefore the back of that, the level of sort of scrutiny almost that you need to go through and be very, very and I can't think of the word, but very sort of regimented in the steps that you go through. Like, we need to check this, and we need to check this, and we need to check this. And how big a perimeter as such would you put in place for somebody like Pope John Paul? Would you be talking about blocks of buildings away, and would you secure that? Because I'm obviously making an assumption it's not just that building that he was going to.
Yeah. You have to basically take a look at it from the point of view of where the threat is coming from.
Yeah.
So if the Pope is or anybody, the president, whatnot, they're in the middle of a facility, you basically stand there and you look around and you look at where the threat can come from.
Yeah.
And in some cases, that's, is it going to be, in the form of, a close threat, somebody that can get up close to them? Is it somebody like a sniper from quite a distance away? So all of these things factor into your planning. And like if it's a sniper, if it's out in the open and you've got tall buildings around. So if you're factoring in for a sniper, you have to have counter snipers. Yeah. And so it's all of that. If you're in a facility, not only, do you have to have people that are standing close by, but you also have areas secured that, God forbid, something were to happen, you have to have egress out of there from different directions. You have to plan for that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And obviously a lot has changed in the, 30 years that I've been out. Now they have more issues in terms of with drones and things like that. So it's gotten exponentially harder for, people that do protection to factor in all of these things.
I haven't even thought about drones, dude.
Yeah, well, I automatically went to the assumption that now you have drones actually that might help with the protection because you can have Skype, but then actually you think it can actually be used to facilitate an attack now because you have got drones that can do a multitude of stupid things these days. So you just factor them. You think, crikey, you haven't just got to think about that. You've got to think about all up there as well. Incredible, really.
It is. So when you watching stuff like Donald Trump recently, when someone took a shot at him and nicked his ear. When you're watching that, do you think how was that allowed to happen? Do you critique it in your mind when you're watching it?
Sure.
And I'm not asking you to stitch up anybody who make comments about people, but
and the funny thing is, when that happened, I was actually at a conference, and I was with several people from the Secret Service and friends of mine, and there were a lot of raised eyebrows that went up on that day. And I don't like to second guess people. And the funny thing to me is watching the response of a lot of others and criticizing it and thinking to myself, some of what they were saying was correct, but a lot of what they were saying was incorrect. And that's the problem. You get all these voices that go running out there trying to, get before a camera or getting, on social media and trying to get, likes and everything. And yet you're putting out information that A, you probably shouldn't be putting out. B, it's not really that accurate. But there were a lot of it. I remember when I first got into the intelligence division, we were doing an event, and one of the guys from the Secret Service, basically, because we worked together with the Secret Service back then in New York. We worked with Secret Service, we worked with State Department, diplomatic security. And I remember one of the guys once saying, we're here and our one goal is to make sure everything goes off without a hitch. So we don't have to sit in front of a Congress with our right hands raised and swearing to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Yeah. And that sits with you. You want that event to go off without a hitch.
Yeah.
And looking at, what happened there were a lot of questions that I had with it.
I can imagine that, from your perspective, from your time in it, it's much better to be a silent part of history and witnessing it that way than having to take an oath and describe it.
I suppose the last thing you want to do, as you say, is to sit there on that chair and look up at Congress and go, "Oh, this is what happened," and I promise I'll tell the truth. That must be, something that again you would never hope that you would have to go through. Just, a question, and you've sort of briefly mentioned it. Then it's just something I want to touch on. Really, we've had a couple of other sort of NYPD guys on with us, and I just want to touch a little bit on sort of 9/11, and obviously, how that sort of influenced you, shaped you. What was your sort of part in it? Were you there? And just sort of talk us through, because obviously it's an experience that and an event that absolutely had impact across the whole world. But again, from the people that we've been talking to, just the level of shock and awe and devastation and stuff for a city. So I just, again, a couple of minutes just talking through, where you were, what you were doing, the impact that A, you had on it, and B, it had on you sort of then and subsequently.
Yeah. It's one of those things that's really hard to kind of put into words, because there's nothing that could ever prepare you for it. And the only thing I could basically kind of, compare it to is like Pearl Harbor. Everything is going great. It's a wonderful day. It's beautiful. Sky is a perfect, clear blue day. Not too hot, not too cold. And next thing you know, you're a witness to history.
Yeah.
And nothing prepares you for it. It was kind of one of those things. I was actually in Brooklyn. It was election day in New York City. So at that time, I was a sergeant, worked for the chief of patrol, and we were doing citywide election duty. So we had just gone, pulled up at a school in Brooklyn where the election poll was, when the first call came over. And it was basically, and people asked me, it must have been a shock. It really wasn't. Somebody came over the radio, said there was an explosion at the World Trade Center. Okay, It's one of those things where it's New York. These things do happen. You have manhole explosions, you have water lines, you have all sorts of things going on. So it really didn't register. And then somebody said your call came over, plane had hit one of the towers. Still kind of really wasn't, because I'm in Brooklyn, I can't see what's going on in Manhattan, but there was really no panic on the radio. And so you kind of like, your mind starts filling in the blanks almost. So you say, okay, World Trade Center, it's down in southern Manhattan. It's between the Hudson and the East River. There's planes. You've got 3 major airports in the general area. You've got, commuter planes going. You've got helicopters going. It's a beautiful day, clear, but accidents do happen.
Yeah.
And so it really wasn't one of those things where we were registering, the scope of what it was, because, we couldn't see it. I stopped for coffee, and I'm in the store getting coffee, and my driver comes running in and says, another plane hit. That's when all of a sudden now your brain is like, nah, there's no way that 2 planes is an accident. Yeah. And so long story short, we end up going in, trying to evacuate people, at that time from lower Manhattan. One of the interesting things, as on a personal note, was that I had quit smoking a week earlier. I had gone through the West Indian Day Parade, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to quit smoking. So 9/11 happens. I'm getting ready to go into Manhattan. And I call my wife and I tell her, just let you know, I'm quitting, because there's no way I'm making it through this day without a cigarette. First place I go to, which was a tobacco place, they did not have my brand of cigarettes, which was the second most popular brand of Marlboro. So the guy kind of like reaches back, the slot's empty. He looks at me, I look at him, I'm like, and I guess I could have probably gotten a different brand, but I didn't. I get back out in the car and I tell my driver, he was out of my cigarettes. I go up a couple of blocks, there's a gas station up there, and I'll get them. So I get them there. We go in. Well, that brief pause where we had to go up to the second place to get the cigarettes, as we were going in through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, we had pulled up just as the South Tower collapsed, and all of that debris came through the tunnel. And I thought that they had attacked the tunnel at that point. So we found a different way into Manhattan. It was only about a week later that I realized if that first place had had the cigarettes, then we would have been pulling up at the South Tower when it came down. Wow. So, it was one of those situations where a pack of cigarettes saved my life.
Yeah. Yes, jeez.
Yeah.
They won't print that on the packets.
Huh?
They won't print
They don't put that on the box, no.
Well, that is incredible. That is incredible. Just the little differences there that makes a huge difference, really.
Yeah, and it is one of those events that it does. It has a huge impact across the whole world, and it's one of those events that I remember where I was when it happened type thing. And we've done a previous podcast, and there's probably been sort of 3 or 4 of those events in my lifetime. I'm sort of the wrong side of 50 now, but you're probably looking at 3 or 4 events that happen, and actually you remember exactly what you were doing and where you were, and certainly 9/11 was one of them. So yes, I thank you obviously for sharing the stories, because obviously it's quite hard for people to talk about, and still is really, for the people that we've had that come from New York, it is still quite hard for them to talk about it. But no, I just appreciate and just wanted just a bit of an insight into, what it felt like for you to be there and at that time. So yes, I just appreciate that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, if you ask anybody, no one really wants to talk about it because it does drag up old memories.
Yeah.
Because most people can tell you exactly where they were, what they were doing. For us that were there, it's a much more visceral response. You go back immediately to it. You can even smell it.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to go through. But I was just talking to somebody not that long ago, and I said, one of the things is, I lost my partner to cancer. That's one of the big things that most people don't realize is that how many of us got sick because of the air.
Yeah.
We've lost, we lost 23 NYPD cops on 9/11. We've lost hundreds more since then, and thousands, probably 10,000 sick, that are still dealing with the aftermath of it. So there's a lot of health issues, and you realize that, just because you don't like to talk about it, you have to talk about it, because you've got a legacy of those that we lost to maintain. You got to make sure that old thing of, never forget. Well, you kind of fall into that category of making sure that people never forget.
Yeah.
So when I'm asked to talk about it, I do, not because I want to, but because you have to carry that legacy over. You got to remind people of, what we lost on that day.
Yeah, amen. That is a really, really important way to think about it. There's an old sort of paradigm where you say, you repeat the mistakes of the past. If you don't talk about them, you don't consider them, you don't consider history. It was put better than that, but that's the principle of it.
No. And as I say, I appreciate your time sort of just talking through that. And again, obviously me and Beans over the pond, over here in the UK sort of thing. We weren't there. We didn't feel it. We didn't live through it. We haven't experienced it. We just know what impact it had towards at that time here. So then you try to extrapolate that and think, crikey, what impact must that have had for you guys over there at the time? And again, just a devastating sort of incident, I suppose. But yeah, really appreciate you just spending some time just talking about that, really.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, like you said, it wasn't just a U.S. tragedy. It was a collective global tragedy, because it was in New York City, but when you look at all of the people that died, that were affected by it, it was a global. There were people from all over the world that lost their lives there. So while it happened in New York, it had repercussions, across the globe. So it affected everybody. You can't look at something like that, see that type of inhumanity, and not be affected by it. So.
No, and like you say, it did affect people all around the globe. Hence, the name of the building itself was the World Trade Center.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just an American thing, although a lot of the lives that were lost were American, and those who were serving that day, which, as you say, really, really, really important to remember. So taking it back then to a little bit earlier in your career, other than that day, some can be humorous, some can be, some can also be, sorrowful, but what are the cases that you remember from your career? Any that really, really sort of stick out?
Yeah, but I don't think we could talk about them on the show. The thing about being a cop in New York is, it's often said you've got a front row seat to the greatest circus in the world. It's New York City. You just take everything and you amplify it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you take cops from anywhere in the world, and they will have like an average day. New York City is so unique in that you're dealing with traumatic experience after traumatic experience throughout the course of a day. You will deal with, a half dozen traumatic experiences before you sit down for a meal. And you learn, and it's like a gallows humor, but you learn coping mechanisms. You have to laugh at it. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to function. And there are so many, stories that, come to mind, and you sit there and you think to yourself, they range from tragic to absurd. And I know Vic writes books about it, and I let those guys, I'll put in, occasional stories in my fiction stuff, but it's almost like when you read books like that and you sit there and you go, that couldn't have happened. Yeah, no, it can, and it did, and it probably happened a dozen or more times. So it's a unique world, policing, and especially policing in New York City, because you never know what you're going to get into. I remember one story. I'll tell you one story. So we get a call for C complainant, nothing more. We get up there, knock on the door. We have no idea what we're getting into. And we hear the people in the apartment, say, open the door, and we can't. And why? Because the cat's out there. The cat's out there? This goes on. We're trying to get them to open the door. They're in an adjacent little room right next to the front door in the bathroom. We cannot get them to open the door. They will not come out. It takes us probably about a half hour to finally convince them. Get the door open. We get the super to come up. He opens up the door. They come running out, slam the door behind them and whatnot, go and sit down on the landing. So what's going on? The cat attacked us. Okay. All right. So we're going to go in and get the cat. So who got attacked? The boyfriend got attacked. Well, where did the cat attack you? Because I can't see anything on him. He's fine. He turns around. I'm not kidding you. This guy had a shirt on. His entire shirt, this cat got on him and ripped the shirt to shreds. He's bleeding. It's torn apart. And I'm like, oh. So I have to get on the radio and I'm requesting emergency service to respond. And they're trying to find out, what kind of cat? I mean, are we talking about like a tiger cat? And it was one of those things that stays with you because it was so absurd. I'm trying to coax these people out of an apartment and thinking to myself, it's a cat. And then you see it and you go, okay, well now I don't want to deal with this cat.
Can we go back in the apartment if the cat's out here? I want to be in there. It's funny because, like I say, when we had Vic on for the first time, and he sort of recalled a couple of stories, and myself and Beans, we had sort of tears rolling down our face because you just think, really, that happened? And Vic's like, oh yeah, and then it happened the same the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day. And it's just, I mean, both myself and Beans have visited New York City. We've both been there, and it literally is. It is one of those cities that is just, it's a 24-hour city, isn't it? It just doesn't stop. And again, like I say, we had Vic on, and we love Vic on this podcast, and we literally just tears rolling down our eyes, just for stories similar to yourself. Just silly stories, but stories that you think, no, surely not. But yeah, in New York, oh yeah, it does.
The hard part about being a cop is you're going to have those funny stories, and then you're going to have the tragic stories.
Yeah,
and often they run concurrent. You can have one incident where I mean, literally, you will have tears running down your eyes, laughing about it. And in 15 minutes, you're in the middle of this tragic event.
Yeah.
And it really is hard. There's sometimes where, as a cop, you'll either sit outside your locker, just sitting there 15 minutes, half hour after your shift is over, just thinking to yourself, trying to process, what the hell did I just go through?
Yeah.
How many times, and you pull up in front of your house and you have to take a deep breath and go, okay, you're almost like you're kind of switching over to now become, the father, the husband, or whatever, after dealing with so much during the course. So it really is, one of those things where there's nothing that really can prepare you for it. It's tragedy and absurdity and everything all just rolled into one.
And you must have to sort of, I suppose, in a way, build in those coping mechanisms, because the roller coaster of emotions would be, you as you said, you go from the sublime to ridiculous to all tragedy to joy to all of those things in the course of a day, and it must be really hard, as you said. Then you pull up at home and you take a deep breath and you get out the car, but then just to leave that behind you, and then, as you said, become the you know, the husband, the father, you know, the coping mechanisms that you must have to try to develop must be, you know, phenomenally strong in order for you to withstand all of those just day to day things that happen that I suppose that the normal populace just wouldn't even have a concept of what it is that you're dealing with.
Yeah, well, I mean, the average person is going to have, like I said, you know, like a traumatic event or two during the course of their lifetime. You will have a half dozen of them before, you know, your first meal, and that happens every day. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, you do have to develop that, otherwise you won't survive.
Yeah.
Mind blown. And so all of this stuff then will have been sort of great fodder for your books. So let's move on to your writing career a little bit. Let's hear a little bit about that, because you like you say, how many books did we say you've written?
I've written 16 all total.
Yeah.
13 of fiction, 3 of nonfiction.
And of those 13 fictional, they sort of fit into a few different categories, don't you? You have your different protagonists.
Yeah.
Did you want to tell us a little bit about, is it James Maguire and Alex Taylor, you know, two of your main protagonists there?
I'd started off with James Maguire, started off with the first book, which is Perfect Pawn. And as I was writing the story, I had an idea, of where I wanted to go. So you kind of develop these characters. I moved on from Perfect Pawn, went into Queen's Gambit, total career change for Maguire. And as I'm writing these stories, I want to bring the reader in. I grew up with Joe Wambaugh, who was an LAPD cop, and I loved those stories that took you and put you in the car with the cops, gave you an insight into, you know, what they saw, how they acted, what they did. And I wanted to do that with my readers, of giving them an inside view of the NYPD, things they weren't going to see from someone who, you know, was in that environment, and not just, you know, the action, but kind of some of that absurdity where you would have cops sitting in a car and they're driving down the street and they're laughing and they're joking with each other and doing the things that cops do basically every day. And I wanted that reader to sit there and kind of chuckle, you know, with it as they're reading it, and then bam, everything goes to hell.
Yeah.
And showing them, you know, just that from comedy almost to sheer terror, and just how quickly it happens. And because that's the way it happens out in the street. You'll be just driving down and everything is going great, and the next thing you know, bullets are flying. And you're like, how the hell did that happen? This is how it happens. And so I wrote Queen's Gambit. And in the interim, I was coming up with a short story that I was going to put out there on my website for people to read while I was writing the next Maguire book. So my mistake was I gave it to my wife to read, and she fell in love with the character of Alex Taylor, and she was like, "This has to be a full book." Okay. So I'm back to square one. But what I realized was that I had Maguire, who I describe as the consummate professional. And then we have Alex Taylor. And Alex Taylor is his old partner when they were on patrol together in Brooklyn North. And Alex is different. Alex is kind of like what I would describe as that old school cop. Definitely kind of bending the rules. And so what I can't get away with Maguire necessarily, I can get away with Alex Taylor.
Yeah.
And Alex is now the chief of police in a small town up in New Hampshire. And so they both come in and out of each other's books. And so you have, you know, the adventures of Maguire and you have the adventures of Alex Taylor. And then I did another thing. I wrote a cold case because I really wanted to get like a little novella out and be able to, like, you know, let readers. I created the character of Angelo Antonucci, and it was in a cold case series. Well, again, my wife got it, fell in love with the character, so now Angelo has his own group of books, but they all operate within the same world. So, I mean, some readers I know probably don't like that, but this is a series and it's an adventure, and you're along for the ride.
Yeah. In terms of Maguire, and you mentioned, you know, sort of Clancy and you know, I've read a lot of Clancy and James Patterson and people like that, you know. So was there a particular literary sort of inspiration for Maguire, or was it just drawing upon different aspects of people that you'd grown up within the NYPD, and you drew from that?
I can't. Well, if we go back to the original story where it started off as a dare, so I just created this character to do a quick story for my wife,
Right.
and when she turned around and said, well, why don't you, write the book, I had to start with this material. And so I had kind of like the outline of the story, the beginning of the story. And as I sat there and I fleshed out the character, I would draw from, different things, my career, people that I knew, areas that I was familiar with. And so I crafted the character based on, it's like a composite of a bunch of different people.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
One of the things that I've read about your characters, or the main protagonists in your books, is that they're all flawed characters.
Hmm.
Why did I mean, it makes them more interesting for sure. Is that what you were going for? So it gave them a more human side, that they weren't these perfect crime fighters.
Yeah, because it doesn't work that way. You'd like to say that everything is, the straight and narrow and whatnot, but you sometimes, the rules do get bent. Let's be real. Characters are flawed because human beings are flawed. And I think it creates a more interesting character for people to read.
Yeah.
That whole, white knight is fine, but sometimes you've got to bend rules in order to achieve things. So I find that it's a lot more interesting when you could sit there and have a character that's morally gray sometimes.
Yeah. And again, you look at sort of the main heroes in in your sort of cop or your CIA and a lot of your ex Navy SEALs, your ex Special Forces, they are quite flawed. They'll have an addiction. They'll have closets in the skeletons in the closet and stuff, and it does almost make them feel more human, I suppose, because as you said, that white knight in shining armor that's going to come in is whiter than white, holier than thou. Do they really exist? Well, possibly, but I think a lot of the time when you read the stories, particularly for me, I quite like the flawed characters because there is something that you can hold on to, and there is something that you can think, oh well, yeah, he does all this, but he's still got that, and I just feel as though it just fleshes the characters out a little bit more. So yeah, I it's great that they have that in them as a person. I just feel it makes them a bit more human if that's the case.
Well, here's the interesting thing. One of the best reviews that I actually got was from a woman that told me that she had cried when she read a particular antagonist's backstory. And wow. I had crafted this person who's the bad guy. I mean, it is what it is. And I wanted the reader to almost second guess their own feelings. I wanted them to go into this. Okay, so here you go. Here's the bad guy. Really bad guy. Don't like him. And then here's his story. And as she read it, she cried over the character because she hated him. She wanted to hate him. But when she read that aspect of the story, something inside of her, it made sense. And it goes back to the old, I don't care how good you are, you're the bad guy in somebody else's story.
Yeah.
And we look at things, we see them from our own perspective. We make a decision, we judge them, but do we ever consider, the reasons why? And I like doing that. I like putting a reader out there and go, okay, well, you tell me, are they good or bad?
Yeah. Yeah. No, because again, just thinking of stories that I've read, and as being said earlier, we both read a lot, and it's he's a bad guy, but has anybody considered actually what his backstory is to get him to the point where he has to be a bad guy? And actually, if you understood some of the decisions that he had to make 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago, that actually put him into this position, you might think of him in a little bit in a different way. And it's almost like the bad guy actually can be quite good because of the decisions that have happened to him. And actually hero could be quite flawed because of the thing. And it is that sort of, is it a juxtaposition? I don't know whether that's the right word or not, but it's almost that byplay of, well, actually, what are the reasons, the decisions, and the consequences that put the good guy in play, and similarly, exactly the same, but for the bad guy.
Yeah. And I think as a reader, when you get invested in these books, they should spur some thought on the characters. I mean, if the characters are too perfect, you've got the knight in shining armor who rescues the damsel, or vice versa, and everything is just smooth. It's kind of like, okay, I mean, it might be an enjoyable book to read, but did it get you to think? Did it make you stop for a moment and go, whoa, it's a flawed character. Why'd they do that? Oh, that's why. Oh, okay. Maybe, they're bad, but maybe they're not as bad as I thought. That to me is fun. That's when you get that, that reading going, thinking about it. That's where I think the magic happens in a book.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. There's a hitman, there's a murderer, but he's quite a considerate murderer because he only murders bad guys. Well, does that make him a bad guy or a good guy?
Yeah,
he's a murderer. He's a multiple murderer. But he only kills mob bosses, or he only kills or he's a contract for hire guy, and he only does this and he only does that. But he's a bad guy. Yeah, but he only kills bad guys. So is he really a good guy? And it's that byplay, isn't it? And I love those characters. Absolutely love those characters.
It makes you think. Yeah.
Would you ever add another, maybe I don't give away too much, another character to that? Would you, maybe a couple of podcast hosts to get people on, solve some mysteries, spare time? I'd say that's a no.
Just, I mean, obviously moving forward in terms of the characters that you've got, is it your wish, your want to sort of write books and more books, and would it be that you would look to write novels about the main protagonist that you already have, or would you expand effectively your series of characters?
One of my problems is that, and I think this is an issue for most authors, and probably why you find out that an author you like writes under a pen name, because you wind up having such a rich world. You never look at anything. Authors, no matter what they're doing, they're thinking about something. They'll be staring out a window, and you think they're just looking out there, and you ask them, what are you doing? And they'll go on this soliloquy about all these characters, and they were thinking about this arc or whatever. But I ended up actually writing a fictional book that is for people that might enjoy this. It took the supernatural vampire genre, and it combined it with the police procedural. And so I kind of like, I tell people it's like Twilight meets NYPD Blue without the annoying kids. So I wanted to see if I could do it. And I created this story, and I actually had somebody contact me and said, this was a great take on the vampire, whole vampire genre, because I rewrote the reasoning behind vampires.
Right.
And I wanted to make it real. If this was going to happen, how does that look? So I wound up writing a book called Awakening, which is the first book in a series. It's going to be a 3-book series, and that's the next one that I'm going to start working on now. And that's the problem. As a writer, you're constantly thinking up new characters.
Yeah.
And you got to kind of like rein yourself in and say, wait a second, you've got to finish off this series before you start another one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. In terms of, so go back to your original character. So you look at Maguire, and do you always have an idea as to where he might end up? And how do you make sure that you don't fall into the trap of potentially writing something in the first book that then doesn't allow you to then extrapolate on that story later on? I suppose, how do you make sure that the first book is not so final? I don't know. He's married, but his wife dies. Well, that's it then. I can't write anything else about that in later books. You know, how do you make sure that the story maintains the longevity, which then allows you to continue writing about him?
Yeah. I got, after the second book, Queen's Gambit, I sat down and actually brainstormed where I envisioned the whole series going.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't know all of the particulars, but it was basically like, okay, so I'm going on this journey. I'm at, point A, and I got to get to point Z. What am I doing here? Because you're right. If you're writing this stuff, you can very easily do something that kind of like negates everything going down the line. Yeah. So I had to sit there and actually say, okay, this is where I want to end up. What am I going to do? What steps do I take to get Maguire from, the starting point to where he needs to be? Yeah. And so it's kind of like a loose framework, but I have the roadmap. He may venture off, on a back road somewhere for, a book, but he'll come back to where he needs to.
Yeah.
So when you're writing these books, I always wonder, a lot of books do get made into films, get made into TV series. Have you ever had that in the back of your mind that this could work for that?
Yeah. I've actually had a lot of people come up to me. I actually had a firm that sells books to Netflix and a lot of Hollywood places asking if the rights were available for it. I think when I sat down to write it, I envisioned it, not the first book, but after, when people were reading it, I was getting all this feedback from readers who said this would make a great movie. And then when I wrote Queen's Gambit and then came out and, Bishopsgate, they were like, this would make a great series. So in the back of your mind, you always have that idea that, somebody, might come calling for it. And I think it would, because I write, and I've told people this, when I'm writing, I'm seeing it basically in my head as a movie. I see the whole scene play out as I'm writing it. And so I'm crafting it in a way that is not only, when somebody can read it, but it will appeal visually to somebody, whether it's on, a movie screen, whether it's on a television screen. The books are written in a way that they are, it's a rich environment, Henry Cavill has to come and play Maguire, though.
That was going to be my next question.
I was going to say, who would it be? Because it's strange because, growing up, I was fascinated by Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and the whole sort of fantasy genre. And I think, Tolkien, in my opinion, is a literary genius. He's an incredible author. But when you read the books, you have this vision in your own mind as to what the character looks like. Yeah. And obviously then when, Peter Jackson, they made the films and they cast all the films and you're like, did they get it right? And actually generally and genuinely, I think they probably did. I would argue with Boromir possibly being the one that isn't, but you have this fascination in your own mind as to, Jack Reacher, for example, it absolutely is not Tom Cruise. That's not him. You know, so all of a sudden, for me, the credibility of that character, I love the books, by the way. Lee Child, I love the Reacher books, incredible series of books. But it wasn't Tom Cruise. So you look at it and think, really? Because, you know, in the books, he's 6'4", 5", he's a drifter, he's, you know, Liam Neeson would have been a better character for him, for example. That would have been, but then you look at, so that loses credibility for me. So do you have in your own mind, obviously, who it would be and what the character looks like? And yeah, perfect, you see, and you've got to get that right, though, haven't you? For that to transmit, I suppose, to the big screen, you have to get that bit right.
Yeah. And going into it, as when I was writing it, as you're writing the characters out, like I said, as I'm doing, you know, the chapters, I'm writing out the dialogue. You create these characters in your head and you go, okay, well, who would it be? Who's close enough to this character so that when I'm visualizing this scene, it makes it takes the visual and makes it easier to put it into words.
Yeah.
And from the very beginning, it was always Henry Cavill in that role. And nothing, you know, has swayed me, you know, from that. I think it would be a disservice not to have him, you know. So, if he's listening, I've got your book for you.
Yeah. So there's a couple of letters wending its way from you over to his agent, say, "Oh, I've got this great series that you might be interested in."
Yeah. And like I said, you have the characters, and also you're going back and you're going, well, what Hollywood, you know, actor or actress could encapsulate that role? Because especially, and the hardest one is kind of for the character of Alex Taylor, because she's very acerbic. She's old school. So if you take that old school cop, the one that was gruff and, you know, gave no quarter, and then made her a female, that's not an easy step to make, and she's got to be, you know, believable with it. And so you're always having those, you know, conversations in your head. Who could play that part?
Go on then. Who could play that part then? Because you obviously thought about it.
Huh?
You've obviously thought about it. So come on, who would play that part?
If I had to, Katie Sackhoff.
Not sure who that is. You realize?
Don't know who that is. No.
Have you ever seen Battlestar Galactica?
Okay. Yes, I have. Yeah.
Boomer. Starbuck. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I've got it.
She actually kind of encapsulates that smart ass that is needed for that role. You know, she's professional, but she's also sarcastic.
Yeah.
And, you know, so we're talking about a cop that was from, you know, NYPD in Brooklyn North. Yeah, she's got to be both competent, you know, tough as nails, and probably as about sarcastic as they come.
Yeah, so ballsy as well. You know, you got to be strong, got to be firm, got to know your own mind, but actually can sort of roll with the punches if necessary, as and when. Yeah, I know, I get that. I like it.
I had to Google it. I do know now.
Yeah. I, as soon as you said Battlestar Galactica, I knew who you're on about, but yeah.
So when the cold case series of books, then are they set crimes that you've covered in your career, or they famous crimes, anything that we might have heard about here in the UK?
No, they all three of the cases. Well, I mean, again, I go back to, you know, it's murder. It's just we're going to create the story for it, and some of it may sound a little bit familiar, but every one of the cases was just something that I just sat down and said, okay, this happened. Now craft a story around it.
Right. Yeah.
Is that something you could do though? Would you ever consider doing one set to the backdrop of something that's more familiar?
I think, and we talked about this. I've having written, you know, 3 nonfiction books.
Yeah.
Where you have to really focus on getting the story right. I prefer the fiction where you might take something as the genesis for the story, a famous, crime. But I think I have to alter it. I've got to craft it. I can take, something that might be familiar, but I'm going to put my own spin on it to the point where it probably isn't going to sound familiar to you anymore. Because I think that when you get into it, if you're doing something that's more well known, you almost feel an obligation to craft the story a way the original incident occurred. And I like to take it and make my characters work around the story.
Yeah, and I suppose almost if you're doing your own, the narrative is yours. Whereas if it was a genuine cold case or a well-known cold case, actually the narrative isn't yours because actually it's already out there and things have happened, and you wouldn't be able to put your spin on it because it's then not fact. Because actually we know that that's happened and we know that's happened. So there's a timeline, there's a narrative, and that then isn't yours then, and you're not able to then craft that the way that you would want it to. So I sort of get why there will be difficulties in doing that, I suppose, because you're a fiction writer, so you want that narrative to be your own, and you want to be able to weave it in ways that potentially didn't happen in real life, but then that's your prerogative because it's your narrative, it's your story.
Right. And I like twists. I like books that have twists in it. I want you to think that we're going down this straight line and you can see exactly where we're going. And sometimes that might happen. And then sometimes you might be like, well, wait a minute, you're flipping back a page and going, what the heck happened? I like that. I like getting caught off guard in a book where you get so invested in the story and you're kind of like, you're walking with the investigator and you're like, okay, I think I got a good grasp on this. I know where it's going. And then you turn the page and it's like, okay, I didn't see that one happening. So yeah.
So when you go online and you have a look, I've read some of the reviews of your books, and I tell you what, you've got some fantastic reviews out there. There's some great commentary on them. Your books are often described as being very realistic, that it's clearly drawn from your NYPD career. There's a moral complexity to the stories and suspended pacing, and the plots are very well layered. Does it fill you with pride to, for someone, who hasn't studied and gone out to be an author, but actually was a police officer? That must fill you with pride to hear people say this wonderful praise about your books.
Well, I love the fact, because like I said, I was a reader. I love reading and getting caught up in the story, getting caught up in the world, and to be someone who can now do that and bring somebody else into my world and introduce them. Yeah, it is a really good feeling on it. It's kind of weird because you grow up as a reader and then you make the leap over into author, and it's sometimes really kind of surreal to see your name on the cover of a book and realize that that's going to outlive you. So, it is. It does, and I enjoy hearing from people who say love this character, hated that character. And I'm sometimes I'm more interested in why they hated the character. Tell me that, or in the case of the one woman who was like, I wanted to hate this person and I hated it. But for that brief moment, I questioned everything, that to me is like, okay, that's I nailed it on that one.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you can evoke a strong emotion, whether that's love or hate with you, right? And I think that's a very special skill. That is a very special skill. If you can craft a character that people genuinely hate, that's a skill.
Yeah. But or genuinely love, and it's either way, isn't it? As Beans has just said, if you can evoke those emotions in somebody when reading, and actually genuinely want people to want to turn the page to find out what's happened to them or what happens to them or where they go on their journey, is an incredible thing, isn't it? To have that investment in a fictional character proves that actually you've done your job, because the readers are invested in that book, and that must be an incredible feeling to do. And as an avid reader, I've got lots of characters that I read and I want to know what's happened to them. So for you as the author to know that me as a reader is doing that must be an incredible feeling.
Yeah, I've actually had several people complain because and one was a young mom who said, I have to get up in the morning and take care of my kids. And here I am, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm going, what chapter? And it's like, I like that. But you probably don't want to start the book at night. And the book that I just wrote, which is called Exposed King, it just came out 2 weeks ago. It's the latest in the McGuire. People were complaining because it was taking forever to come out with the book. And this was actually the hardest book that I have written to date. And I actually did the outline of this book back in 2019. So we're talking, 5 years in the making. And it was one of those things where in 2019, it was safe to come up with the idea of what would happen if, when you turn around and say, well, what happens when the system basically collapses?
Yeah.
What happens when the laws no longer followed? What happens when people start? And in 2019, it was safe to do that. And I had this whole outline. I started sitting down there and I was just, it's fiction. It's what if. I'm writing down all of these things. Okay, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. That's the next thing I know, I'm watching the news. And it's like all the things that I outlined in my plot are coming to fruition. I'm seeing the changes going on in society that are looking every bit like the fiction that I wrote, but it's real. And it almost became stressful writing the story because I'm writing about things that shouldn't, we're a civilized society. We shouldn't be going down this path, and we are. And it became one of those things where I'm trying to write the book, but I don't want to write the book because I'm watching what's happening on TV and it's mirroring this. And so the book is out there, and it kind of, it's one of those tales where you want to say, read this and see what's happening. You're not going to like it.
Yeah.
And it was a warning book, I would have to say. Now it's setting up something coming down the road, but it was a hard novel to. I started with fits and starts trying to get this book done, and it was just, I don't know if I want to finish it.
Well, these books, guys, I think these would be right up your alley. Everything that I've read about them,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I grew up, loving Tolkien, and he's still my favorite author. But I have sort of my genre. I read a lot of cop, sort of CIA, FBI type sort of. I read shitloads of sort of Tom Clancy, back in the day, and that type of genre. I really, really, really enjoy. So these sound absolutely right up my street. And genuinely, I actually can't wait to sort of dive into them and start with Perfect Porn and see where we go. And I absolutely will read it because it genuinely sounds right up my street.
Somebody had asked me what genre I wrote in, and it actually, I didn't have an answer for them because it's like, there's aspects of mystery, police procedural, true crime, psychological, political, thriller, suspense. It kind of will take you on a journey depending on what book you're reading. And there are going to be elements in there that just, they don't fit. We'll go from, you're dealing with, a crime that occurs, but then there's an undercurrent of political.
Yeah.
And so you're jumping across all these things, and it really, the reader is going to go on a wild ride. It's going to be like on a roller coaster. You're not going to know, where are we going now?
Yeah. Genuinely, like, can't wait, and I will. I say I'll I'll definitely sort of have a purchase and see where we go. Yeah, 100%, because it genuinely does sound right up my alley.
Yeah, definitely. So just out of interest then, what's the one thing you want readers to take away from your books?
I think from the aspect of looking at law enforcement as human beings, of seeing them for something, because all too often, our opinion on law enforcement comes from a TV screen, whether, it's something, heroic like 9/11, or something, tragic when somebody betrays the badge. That there's a human being behind that badge. And even like even the lower characters that aren't like, headlining the book, they're just there. You experience their lives for that brief moment, and maybe seeing them in a different light, that realizing that, we are human. We do great things. We also mess up too, but it's part of that whole, that human, character. They're morally gray, because black and white doesn't always cut it.
Yeah.
You here's the question, what are you going to do to prevent something from happening? What would you do?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I want the reader to go on that journey and see it, presented in a way that maybe they didn't see it before, or even in the case of, you got the protagonist, but what about the antagonist?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to hate the antagonist, but the antagonist has a story too. So,
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. So did you want to tell our listeners then where they can find your books, where they can find your website, and where they can find you on social media?
Okay. You can find my books. They're available at Amazon, of course, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. You can find them. Go to my website, which is andrewgnelson.org. You can sign up for my free newsletter there. I don't spam people. I'll send you out, information on new coming books. Maybe I'll write an article that I think you'll find interesting and send it to you, but I don't overdo it. And you can find me on social media. I'm not a social media person. I have X. I'm on there, but that's basically it. I don't have time for social media. And I know people are on Instagram and are on Facebook and they're all of those things. And it's like, I got to juggle this. I got to find time to write, and sometimes you get on these social media sites and it's like a black hole. I'm there for 4 days and
yeah, amen. And well, it's Andrew_G_Nelson on X or Twitter.
Yeah.
But no, thank you very much for spending some time with us. I really, really appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to reading this book. Mainly because when I hear you talk about the character, you don't talk about him like as a fictional individual. You talk about it as somebody you know, somebody you're familiar with, and someone who genuinely exists out there in this world. And I like the reality of that.
Yeah, I like what Beans has just said. I genuinely can't wait to read it. It does sound, it sounds like a book that I will enjoy. So, I look forward to picking it up and then progressing through the series, and see where Maguire goes to.
Indeed.
Oh, he's going to go through a lot.
Oh no, you're just teasing now. You see, that's it. That's the hook now.
No. So thank you very much for spending a little over an hour with us, Andrew. Thank you for sharing that time. And what I will do, I'll share the links that you've just shared there in our show notes. So when these episodes are out on the audio, people can just click on the links and hopefully buy your books. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I really had a great time.
Cheers. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Friends around the mic, kicking back, all right. Day turns into night, podcast in the spotlight.